In the humid sprawl of Miami lives a woman named Rowan Hartley. To the late-night truckers she serves and the bleary-eyed patrons nursing their third cup of coffee, she is nearly invisible, just another waitress in a stained uniform trying to survive. She moves between the checkered floors of Mel's diner like a ghost, refilling cups, wiping tables, collecting dollar bills that disappear as quickly as they arrive. But if they looked closer, they would see the frayed backpack that never leaves her shoulder, the way she washes her face in the employee bathroom with careful precision, the exhaustion carved into her 28-year-old face like something much older. Rowan owns almost nothing. In her pocket right now, at this very moment, sits $34. $34 that needs to last until Saturday. That is 6 days away. 6 days to buy coffee for herself, gas for the 2003 Honda Civic parked behind the Chevron on Flagler Street, and the cheap deli meat she feeds to Oliver at lunchtime. Oliver is 7 years old, and he still believes his mother is coming back. Rowan has not yet found the words to tell him that some mothers never do. 3 months ago, a fire consumed the shelter where she worked and lived. She was on the 3rd floor when the smoke alarm screamed. She was 30 seconds away from her own room when she heard a child crying. That child was Oliver. His caretaker had locked him in a bathroom and left him there while she smoked cigarettes outside. Rowan did not think. She climbed through flames that singed her hair and scorched her forearms. She pulled Oliver into her arms and descended through smoke so thick she could not see his face, only feel his small body trembling against her chest. They made it out. Her room did not. Everything she owned, documents, clothes, the money she had saved for 2 years, turned to ash. She stood in the parking lot at dawn holding a photograph of her mother and $34 in her pocket. She sleeps in that car now. Every night she climbs into the back seat with her frayed backpack as a pillow. She washes her face in gas station bathrooms using paper towels and tap water. The gold locket around her neck, the only thing that survived the fire, she touches it the way other people touch prayer beads. Her mother wore this locket for 40 years. Her mother is dead now. The locket is all that remains. During the day, while Oliver is at school, Rowan works shifts at a cleaning company, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees in office buildings downtown. When Oliver gets out at 3 o'clock, she picks him up and brings him to Mel's diner, where the owner, a weathered man named Mel with cigarette-stained fingers, allows the boy to sit in the corner booth with his homework while his mother works the night shift. Mel does not pay her enough. Nobody pays her enough. The tips are sparse, erratic, sometimes non-existent. Last week a man left her a quarter on a $40 tab. A single quarter. Rowan pocketed it without expression and moved on to the next table. But on this particular night, on this humid June night when the sky splits open with lightning and rain hammers the diner windows like fists demanding entry, something shifts. It is 3:22 in the morning. The diner is nearly empty. Only Mel remains behind the counter, half asleep over a dog-eared paperback, and one customer in the last booth. That customer is a man of approximately 45 years old, with shoulders broad enough to block out light, dressed in a charcoal suit that costs more than everything Rowan owns. His hair is black, silvered at the temples. A scar runs from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, thin, pale, precise, like a blade had once tried to erase him and failed. His name is Giovanni Russo, though Rowan does not know this yet. Giovanni sits alone. His phone rests on the table in front of him, and it has rung 7 times in the past hour. Each time he looks at the screen, his jaw tightens like a man swallowing broken glass. Each time he does not answer. He is waiting for something. He is waiting for news, and the news is late. Rowan approaches his booth with coffee pot in hand. She has learned to move with efficiency in the small hours of the night, to refill cups without asking, to become part of the background like the humming refrigerator and the flickering neon sign outside that spells EATS in dead red letters. "More coffee?" she asks, her voice barely a whisper. Giovanni looks up. For a moment, he seems to see through her, as if she is not quite solid, not quite real. Then he nods, and she pours. The coffee steams in the fluorescent light. That is when the bell above the door chimes. A woman staggers through, and immediately the temperature inside the diner seems to shift. She is in her early 30s, soaking wet, her long black hair plastered to her face. She moves with the careful, precise steps of someone who cannot see. Her hands are outstretched before her like she is feeling for walls in the dark. And she is calling out, not in English, but in Korean, a voice trembling with panic and rain. "Annyeonghaseyo? Annyeonghaseyo? Does anyone speak Korean? I cannot find my way. I cannot see. Please, someone, please." Rowan's coffee pot hits the counter. She does not remember setting it down. She is moving toward the woman before any thought has formed in her mind, before her body has consulted her brain about this decision. The woman is blind, and she is afraid, and Rowan has learned in her 28 years of living that fear is a language she understands fluently. "I am here," Rowan says, and her voice is different now, no longer a whisper, but steady and clear like a hand extended in darkness. "I am here. You are safe." Rowan guides the woman to the nearest booth, not the one where Giovanni sits, but a few tables away. She brings her paper towels from behind the counter, helps her dry her face. The woman's hands are shaking. Rowan holds them for a moment, and in that gesture is something profound. It is the touch of one person who has known desperation reaching across to another. "What is your name?" Rowan asks. "My son," the woman says, still breathing hard. "I am my son. My caretaker left me downtown. She said she would be 15 minutes. That was 6 hours ago. I have been walking. I could not find the way home. I do not know where I am. My son wears a yellow sundress soaked with rain. There is a medical ID bracelet on her wrist. Her eyes are milky white, sightless, but not empty. She is clearly terrified and clearly relieved all at once." Rowan brings her hot water and a clean towel. She sits across from her. She does something she has not done in 3 months. She speaks to another human being with tenderness, with presence, with all of her attention focused on someone other than her own survival. "You are at Mel's Diner in Miami," Rowan says quietly. "You are safe now. I will help you find your way home." That is when Giovanni Russo stands up. His movement is sudden, controlled, deliberate. His chair scrapes backward with a sound like something tearing. Rowan does not see him at first because her attention is on my son, but she hears the breath catch in his chest. She hears the sharp intake of air that a man makes when he sees something that shifts his entire world. "My son," Giovanni says, and his voice is deep and solid like an oath, trembling now with something Rowan will later understand is profound relief mixed with fury. My son's head turns toward the sound. "Giovanni?" Her voice breaks into something like joy and something like desperation. "Is that you? How are you here? I did not know where I was. That woman, she just left me. She left me alone in the dark and I could not." Giovanni crosses the diner in 4 strides. He does not look at Rowan. His entire being is focused on his sister. He kneels beside the booth, actually kneels, this man whose suit costs more than a year of Rowan's salary, and he takes my son's hands in his own, and for a moment the entire world seems to hold its breath. "I am here now," he says. "You are here now. You are safe. I promise you, you are safe." Rowan watches this from a distance, and she understands, in that moment, that she has just done something that matters. But she does not know who this man is. She does not know his name. She does not know that he is one of the most dangerous men in Miami, that his organization spans 3 states, that his word is currency and his anger is consequence. She does not know that he lost his parents in violence, that he raised my son himself from the age of 19, that losing her 3 months ago in a caretaker's betrayal nearly broke something essential inside him. She does not know that this single act of kindness, a woman in a stained uniform approaching a stranger with gentle hands in the middle of the night, will pull her into a world where nothing will ever be the same again. Giovanni stands, and his eyes finally find Rowan. They are dark, nearly black, burning with something she cannot name. Gratitude, yes, but something else underneath. Something sharp like recognition. "You helped my sister," he says. It is not a question. "She was lost," Rowan replies, and there is no apology in her voice because she has done nothing wrong. "I helped her find her way." Behind the counter, Mel stops pretending to read his book. Vinny and Enzo, two men in dark suits who have been sitting motionless in a black SUV outside the diner for 6 hours, watching their boss's phone for any sign of news, suddenly see movement through the rain-streaked window and they move with the precision of men trained in anticipation. Giovanni reaches into his pocket. Rowan tenses slightly because she has learned that pockets sometimes contain things that hurt. But what emerges is a business card. He places it in her hand. "If you ever need anything," he says, and his voice is quiet now, almost gentle, "you call this number." "You ask for Giovanni. You understand me." Rowan looks at the card. It is cream-colored, expensive, with a single name and a phone number embossed in silver lettering. "I do not know who you are," she says, and there is something clear in her eyes. She is not intimidated, merely observant. "No," Giovanni agrees. "You do not. But you will. And when you do, you will understand that what you did tonight matters more than you could possibly know." He turns back to his sister. She is asking questions in rapid Korean, and he is answering, his voice tender in a way that transforms his entire face. The scar seems to fade. The hardness around his eyes softens. Rowan walks to the kitchen. She does not look at the business card in her hand. She does not allow herself to feel the strange weight of this moment. She has learned that feeling things too deeply is a luxury she cannot afford. But the gold locket around her neck seems to warm against her skin, and for just a moment, just the smallest, quietest moment, Rowan Hartley wonders if her mother, somewhere in whatever comes after, is watching. If her mother is proud of her daughter for reaching toward a stranger in the dark. The rain continues to hammer the diner windows. The neon sign flickers. And in the last booth, a blind woman and a crime lord speak in Korean, reunited by the grace of a waitress who owns nothing but a backpack and $34, but who still had everything that matters to give. The fire started at 2:47 in the morning. Not at 2:46, not at 2:48, but at exactly 2:47, when the world was at its darkest and most vulnerable, when the people who worked the night shift were deep in their exhausted sleep, trusting that morning would come. Rowan Hartley woke to the sound of smoke detectors screaming. The noise was not gentle. It was not a suggestion. It was a blade of sound cutting through the darkness of her small room at the Riverside Community Shelter, where she had lived and worked for the past 4 years as the overnight coordinator. For 4 years, this had been her home. A single bed with a quilt her mother had made, a dresser with 3 changes of clothes, a desk with paperwork, a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Everything she owned in the world fit in that 12 by 14 room. The smoke was already thick. Rowan did not think. Thinking is what kills people in fires. She pulled her blanket over her nose and moved toward the door, but the heat pushed her back like an invisible hand. The door was hot. Not warm. Hot. The kind of heat that means there is nothing on the other side but flame and darkness and the sound of wood being consumed. Her instinct was to scream. Instead, she turned and moved toward the hallway. The smoke was black and alive. It moved like something with intention. It filled her lungs and tasted like burning plastic and melted rubber and chemicals she could not name. Her eyes were already watering so badly she could barely see. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel collapsing. One end led to the main staircase. The other direction, the back stairs, the ones the maintenance people used, was her only choice. Down the hallway, children were crying. The Riverside Community Shelter housed 23 people on any given night. 17 of them were children. Rowan could hear them calling for their mothers, calling for help, calling for someone who would tell them this was not real. The sounds were small and broken and terrible. She moved toward Oliver's room instead of the stairs. Oliver Chen was 7 years old. His mother, Sarah Chen, had brought him to the shelter 6 months earlier with a black eye and 2 suitcases. 6 months. Sarah had stayed for 4 weeks and then disappeared one Tuesday morning, leaving a note that said only, "I cannot do this anymore. Please take care of my baby." Rowan had held Oliver while he cried, and then she had held him while he stopped crying, because sometimes the worst pain is the kind that makes you numb. The fire had been burning for 6 minutes by the time she reached his room. Oliver was standing in the middle of his bed, frozen. His eyes were open but seeing nothing. The smoke in his room was less thick, the window was open, which meant the fire had not reached this corner yet, but it was coming. The heat was coming. The sound of the burning was getting louder. "Oliver," she said, and her voice was steady because children need steady. "I need you to jump." He did not jump. He stood on the bed like a small statue, paralyzed. Rowan grabbed her blanket from her hands, she had carried it with her without thinking, and wrapped it around his shoulders. She lifted him. He was small enough to carry. 7 years old and weighing barely 45 pounds, skin and bones and terror. She held him against her chest and moved back toward the hallway. The back stairs. Get to the back stairs. The smoke was darker now. The world was becoming black. Rowan could hear people running. She could hear sirens in the distance. She could hear the sound of the building groaning, wood splitting, glass breaking somewhere. She moved down the back stairwell, one hand on the rail, the other holding Oliver. 41 steps. She had climbed them every morning for 4 years going up to her room, and she had never thought about how many there were, but now she counted them like a prayer. 30 steps. The door was close now. 35 steps. Heat at her back. 40. She pushed through the emergency exit door and fell into the parking lot. The cool air hit her like a shock. Her lungs rejected it and then welcomed it. Oliver was coughing, his whole body shaking. Rowan set him down on the asphalt and held him while the fire trucks arrived, their red lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade through water. When the sun came up, there was nothing left. The Riverside Community Shelter was a shell. Black timber and ash and the smell of burning that would cling to Rowan's clothes for weeks. The shelter director, a woman named Patricia, found Rowan at 6:43 in the morning, standing in the parking lot in borrowed pajamas that belonged to another resident. Rowan was holding 2 things, a photograph of her mother, pulled from the fire somehow, and a gold locket that had been around her neck. The photograph was singed at the edges. Her mother was young in it, maybe 22, smiling at the camera with her hair down and her whole life ahead of her. The locket was older. Real gold, small enough to fit in Rowan's palm. Inside was another photograph, smaller, also of her mother. And pressed against that was a strand of dark hair tied with a piece of red thread. Rowan's hair, cut when she was 3 years old. Her mother had kept it. All these years, Rowan's mother had kept it. Oliver was wrapped in an emergency blanket, drinking warm milk from a plastic cup. Patricia was crying. Patricia never cried. "Your room is gone," Patricia said. "Everything. Your documents. Your social security card. Your birth certificate. Your savings account checkbook. We found your purse. It was in the kitchen. The money inside." She did not need to finish the sentence. Rowan opened her purse with hands that did not feel like her own. $18 in bills. $16 in change. $34 total. That was all the money in the world that belonged to her. That was her life in numbers. "Where will you go?" Patricia asked, and the answer was that she did not know. What followed was a kind of disappearing that happened slowly, over weeks and months. Rowan Hartley became the kind of person the world no longer saw. She existed in the margins. She moved through spaces without leaving impressions. She became invisible by necessity and then by habit. The first week, she slept in her 2003 Honda Civic in the parking lot of the Chevron on Flagler Street. The car was a gift from a man named James who had been in the shelter 3 years ago, a man who had gotten clean and found an apartment and a job and then died of a heart attack at 41. He had left his car to Rowan in his will. She had kept it registered and maintained, never thinking she would need it for shelter. Now she needed it. She angled the Civic between two larger vehicles, behind the station where the night manager, a person named Raj who smoked cigarettes and listened to podcasts, did not call the police. She reclined the driver's seat. She covered herself with a blanket. She tried to sleep while the parking lot lights hummed and the wind moved through the chassis of the car and the world continued without her in it. The morning routine became a ritual. 5:30 a.m., Rowan would wake. Her neck would ache from sleeping at an angle. Her left shoulder would be stiff. She would start the car and drive to the Chevron, to the bathroom where the fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects. She would use the key attached to the gas pump. She would lock the bathroom door. She would strip off the clothes she had slept in and change into her Mel's Diner uniform, white short-sleeved shirt with a small coffee stain on the left pocket that would not come out, black pants with a seam that had been repaired twice, white sneakers with a hole in the heel. She would wash her face using paper towels and cold tap water. She would brush her teeth using a travel toothbrush and water. She would pull her hair back into a ponytail. She would look at herself in the mirror and see a woman who had been 29 years old 3 months ago and now looked like someone in her mid-40s. The fire had done something to her face. Not visibly. No scars. But something in her eyes had changed. Something had burned away. Then she would drive to the neighbor's apartment. The neighbor was a woman named Yolanda who had taken pity on her. Yolanda watched Oliver during the day for $50 per week, which was money Rowan did not have, but Yolanda accepted whatever Rowan could pay, sometimes $20, sometimes $30, sometimes just a bag of groceries from the shelter's donations. Oliver stayed with Yolanda from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. He had started school again. He was trying to be normal. He was failing at it, because normal is not something a 7-year-old can manufacture after losing everything. Rowan worked the night shift at Mel's Diner from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. 10 hours standing on her feet. 10 hours smelling coffee and hash browns and the grease that had accumulated in the air over decades. 10 hours being looked through by people who saw only the function she provided: waitress, coffee refiller, booth cleaner. The diner had a black and white checkered floor and neon lights that flickered. The same 8 customers came every night. There was a man named Frank who ordered black coffee and read the newspaper and left $2 tips. There was a couple who ordered eggs and toast and whispered to each other. There was a woman who came in at midnight and ordered pie and cried silently. There was the long-haul trucker who smelled like diesel and told the same jokes every week and did not remember telling them. They did not see Rowan's face. They saw her hands delivering cups. They saw her moving through the diner with the kind of efficiency that comes from desperation. They did not see the gold locket under her uniform, against her heart. At 3 a.m., things slowed. The trucker would leave. The pie woman would leave. Frank would finish his newspaper. The couple would finish eating. For 45 minutes, the diner would be empty except for Mel, who cooked, and Tom, who washed dishes, and Rowan, who counted her money. The counting was a ritual. She would stand in the kitchen and open the envelope where Mel let her keep her tips. Every night, the ritual was the same. Counted bills in one stack, counted coins in another. Tonight, $18 in bills, $12 in coins. $30 in tips. Plus the $4 in coins she had found in the car, in the washing machine at the laundromat, on the ground in the Chevron. $34. Always $34. Because every dollar that came in went directly to Oliver's food, to Yolanda's care, to gas for the car, to the car's registration, to the phone bill so social services could reach her, to the effort of staying alive. Nothing was left over. Nothing was ever left over. But 70 miles away, in the Coral Gables neighborhood where the houses had actual foundations and actual roofs and gates made of wrought iron, Giovanni Russo was sitting in his study at 2:47 in the morning, the exact moment the fire at Riverside was starting, and receiving information that would change everything. The information was 17 years old. His investigators had been searching for it in every database, every closed adoption agency, every falsified birth certificate, for 17 years. Giovanni's brother, Marco, had stolen something from him, not money, never money, but something far more valuable. A child. A son. Giovanni had been married once, to a woman named Elena. Elena had died giving birth to their son. The birth certificate said male child, stillborn. Giovanni had believed this for 17 years. Then, 6 months ago, he had hired new investigators with better resources, and they had found the truth. His son was alive. His son had been adopted. His son was somewhere in Miami, living a life, not knowing that his biological father was a man who commanded $200 million and the absolute loyalty of everyone in a 5-block radius. What Giovanni did not know was that his son was 7 years old, sleeping in a neighbor's apartment on a twin bed with Spider-Man sheets, because his mother had died in a fire, and he was waiting to be placed in foster care because he had no other family. What Giovanni did not know was that a waitress with $34 and a gold locket was about to change everything. Lightning fractured the sky at 3:22 in the morning, and Giovanni Russo sat alone in the last booth at Mel's diner, staring at his phone like it might rearrange itself into better news. The call had come 40 minutes earlier. His sister Emma's son, blind since birth, had wandered out of the house during the storm. The caretaker had fallen asleep. By the time anyone noticed, Emma's son was gone into the Miami night, into the rain and thunder, into the streets that held no shape for her, just sound and cold and the terror of being lost. Giovanni had left his estate immediately, left the men scrambling to organize search grids, left behind the weight of $200 million and every connection he had ever built. None of it mattered. Money could not call his sister home. Power could not navigate the rain for her. He was doing what he had sworn never to do again. He was helpless. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and grease, a place where the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song and the black and white checkered floor stretched beneath tables where nobody important ever Saturday. Giovanni's suit clung to his frame, rain dripping onto the leather booth seat. Dark hair grayed at the temples, sharp jawline marked by a thin scar that ran from his eye to his cheekbone, the kind of face that made people look away first. He did not order. He did not speak to anyone. He simply sat with his phone and waited for the next message, the next grid searched, the next hour of his sister being alone somewhere in the dark. The door crashed open. A young woman in a white cane, stumbling, gasping for air in Korean, her face twisted with panic. Emma's son had found her way to the diner somehow, pulled by the light spilling from the windows, by the human voices inside. Her clothes were soaked. Her hands trembled as she tapped the cane erratically against the floor. Rowan Hartley saw her from behind the counter and moved. There was no hesitation. No calculation. She simply set down the coffee pot and walked toward the blind woman like she had been waiting her whole life for this exact moment to matter. "You're safe now," Rowan said, her voice steady as a hand finding solid ground. "You're okay. Let me get you dry." She guided Emma's son to a booth, not the one where Giovanni sat, but near enough that he could see everything. She brought towels from the kitchen. Hot tea. She sat across from Emma's son and held her shaking hands, speaking in calm tones, letting the woman's breathing slow, letting her terror settle into something manageable. Only then did she seem to notice Giovanni. When she did, she moved to his table. She poured him coffee, set the cup down carefully, and their eyes met for a moment across the steam rising from the ceramic. Two people carrying the same exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had lost everything and was still breathing anyway. "Is she yours?" Rowan asked quietly. "My sister," Giovanni said. His voice sounded like it was coming from far underwater. "She's blind. She shouldn't have been outside. She shouldn't have been alone." "She's not alone now," Rowan said. She turned back to Emma's son, who was beginning to hum softly, a sound like prayer. Giovanni watched this waitress, this woman in a uniform washed so many times the name tag was barely readable, this woman whose calloused hands moved with the gentleness of someone who understood suffering, and something in his chest shifted. something he thought he had buried years ago. When Emi-san's breathing had fully steadied, when her hands had stopped shaking, Giovanni approached their booth. He knelt beside his sister, spoke to her in Korean, the words tumbling out like water finally finding an opening. "Where have you been? Are you hurt?" "I got lost in the rain," Emi-san said in Korean, then switched to English, her accent thick but clear. "This woman. She found me. She brought me inside. She was so gentle." Giovanni turned to Rowan. Their eyes met again, and this time he really looked, not at her uniform, but at her. At the bruises fading on her wrist. At the way her left shoe had a piece of duct tape holding the sole to the upper. At the gold locket visible beneath her collar, so worn the chain was thin as thread. "Thank you," he said. The second word cracked. "Anyone would have done it," Rowan said, but she was lying. They both knew it. "Not anyone," Giovanni said quietly. He pulled out his wallet, black leather, Italian-made, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent if she had had a monthly rent. He placed 3 $100 bills on the table. $300. More money than Rowan had held in 3 months. She stared at them like they were a hallucination made of paper and ink. "What's your name?" Giovanni asked. "Rowan." "Rowan Hartley." He nodded once, then helped Emi-san to her feet, guided her toward the door. But at the threshold, he turned back and looked at her one final time, this woman who had treated his sister with more kindness than anyone had in years. Then he disappeared into the rain, back into the night that held his men and his empire and the life he had built on the principle that mercy was something only the weak afforded. Rowan stood alone in the empty diner, the $300 bills trembling in her hands. She touched the gold locket at her throat, her mother's locket, the only thing she had left that proved her mother had ever lived, and she whispered a prayer she had not prayed since the fire. She had no way of knowing that the man who had just walked out of her diner was one of the most dangerous people in Miami. She had no way of knowing he would have her investigated within the hour. She had no way of knowing that his sister was not just his sister, but the key to a truth 17 years in the making, a truth that would change both their lives. All she knew was that she had $300, and Oliver needed new shoes, and tomorrow morning she could buy him breakfast with eggs instead of canned beans. Sometimes one small kindness, given freely to a stranger, opens a door you never knew existed. Sometimes the person you help is the one person who can help you back. Sometimes the moment that changes everything arrives not with thunder, but with a blind woman stumbling through a diner door, seeking shelter from the rain. 2 days later, the knock came. Rowan was at the neighbor's apartment picking up Oliver when she heard it, 3 sharp raps on the door that made her stomach drop like a stone into water. She had been so careful. She had not done anything wrong. But the knock sounded official, sounded like authority, sounded like the life she was barely holding together was about to collapse again. 2 men in dark suits stood in the hallway. They had the kind of faces that had seen violence and accepted it as part of the cost of living. One of them, Vinny, spoke with the certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Russo would like to speak with you." Rowan's first thought was that she had stolen something. Her second thought was that the money was counterfeit. Her third thought was that she was about to lose Oliver because these men were here to take him away. "If you just give us 1 minute," she started. "Now," Vinny said. The black SUV was waiting downstairs, its tinted windows reflecting the Miami morning like mirrors that showed nothing. Rowan sat in the back with Oliver's hand gripping hers, her heart hammering against her ribs. The leather seat smelled of expensive cologne and money. The men did not speak. They simply drove through Miami, past the neighborhoods where houses had actual foundations, past the parks where children played in safety, past the world that had never belonged to her, until they arrived at a restaurant that was closed to the public. The back room was lit. Giovanni Russo sat at a table dressed in a suit that probably cost more than everything Rowan owned, and across from him sat his sister Emi-san, smiling like the world had not tried to destroy her. When Rowan entered, Giovanni stood. His movements were controlled, deliberate, each one calculated. But his eyes were different than they had been in the diner. Softer. Searching. "Thank you for coming," he said. My son reached across the table, found Rowan's hands by touch, and spoke in accented English. "You saved me. You didn't have to." Rowan's throat tightened. "It was nothing." "Really?" "It was everything," my son said. Oliver had been quiet this whole time, holding Rowan's hand, taking in the restaurant with the careful observation of a child who had learned that safety could disappear at any moment. But then his eyes caught on something, a photograph on the side table. A young boy, maybe 6 years old, sitting on someone's lap. Oliver released Rowan's hand and walked toward it, reached for it with the certainty of recognition. He stared at the photograph for 3 full seconds. "That's me," he whispered. The room went silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that has consequence. Giovanni's face went white. He stood, walked to Oliver, took the photograph with hands that had started to shake. It was a picture from 7 years ago, an infant with a specific configuration of features, a small scar above the left eyebrow from a fall on marble tile. The same scar Oliver carried. "What is your name?" Giovanni asked, and his voice sounded like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. "Oliver," the boy said. "My mom said my dad didn't want us." Giovanni's hand started shaking so badly he had to set the photograph down. He turned to Vinny. "Get me the file. Now." The next hour unfolded like a nightmare in reverse, moving backward through time to reveal the truth that had been hidden for 7 years. Elena Russo, Giovanni's first love. Hidden away by his betraying brother when he had defected to rival families. Told to Giovanni that she was dead. Told to Elena that Giovanni had abandoned her. Both lies, constructed with the precision of cruelty. Elena had raised Oliver alone. Elena had died in the Riverside shelter fire 3 months ago. Oliver had been sleeping in the neighbor's apartment since then, waiting to be placed in foster care because he had no other family. But he did. Giovanni knelt in front of Oliver, and tears were streaming down his face. In 15 years, Vinny and Enzo had never seen him cry. In 15 years, he had never shown weakness in front of anyone. But here he was, on his knees before a 7-year-old boy, his shoulders shaking. "I am your father," he said. "I have been looking for you for 7 years. I never abandoned you. I never knew you existed until right now." Oliver looked at Rowan, uncertain. "Is he telling the truth?" Oliver asked. Rowan, crying herself, nodded. "I think he is, sweetheart." Giovanni stood and turned to Rowan. His face was wet, vulnerable, transformed by something that looked like both joy and devastation combined. "You saved my sister," he said. "You protected my son. How do I repay that?" "You don't," Rowan said. "I did what anyone would have." "Stop," Giovanni interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "Stop saying that. I had you investigated after that night. Not to hurt you. To understand who would show such kindness to a stranger. You are homeless, Rowan Hartley. You sleep in your car. You own nothing but a backpack and $34. And you saved my family twice without knowing it." Rowan looked away, shame burning her cheeks, but Giovanni continued. "You lost everything in a fire. You have been protecting my son for 3 months while living in poverty. You are not nobody. You are the woman who saved my life. Why would you help me?" Rowan asked. "I don't understand." "Because mercy is a debt," Giovanni said. "And I pay my debts." The door to the restaurant exploded inward. Anthony Marchetti stood in the frame, mid-30s, muscular, wearing a police detective's badge on his belt. His face was a map of rage. Behind him stood 2 cops who looked uncertain, like men who had been promised something they were not sure they believed. "There she is," Anthony said, pointing at Rowan. "That's my girlfriend. She's unstable. She kidnapped that kid." Everything in the room shifted. Giovanni's entire demeanor changed, the gentleness evaporated like water on summer asphalt. He stood slowly, and Vinny and Enzo moved to flank him. "Officers," Giovanni said, his voice dropping into a register that sounded like gravel and thunder combined. "I suggest you leave. Now." The cops exchanged a look. They had no idea who Giovanni Russo was, but they could feel what he was. The kind of man who commanded rooms by simply existing in them. They turned toward the door. "This isn't over, Rowan," Anthony said as he backed out. "You can't hide from me. I always find you." When they were gone, Rowan was shaking so badly she could barely stand. "He'll come back," she whispered. "He always comes back. He has cop friends. He knows where I park my car. I have to leave Miami. I have to take Oliver Ann." "No," Giovanni said. His jaw was tight. "You stay. Let me handle Anthony Marchetti." That evening, in a guest room of Giovanni's estate, Rowan stood at the window watching the gardens turn purple in the fading light. Oliver was asleep in the next room, his first real bed in months, his breathing finally steady. She was touching the gold locket when she heard the knock. Cordelia Blackwood stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed, her smile precise as a scalpel. "And who exactly are you?" Cordelia asked, her eyes moving across Rowan with cold calculation. "I'm helping with Oliver," Rowan said. "How charitable," Cordelia replied, her voice dripping poison. "Though I do hope you understand this is temporary. Men like Giovanni don't keep women like you around for long." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. Rowan retreated to her room and closed the door. She touched the locket, feeling the old shame return like a tide. But through the wall she heard Oliver laugh, truly laugh, for the first time since his mother died, and she knew she could not leave him. Not yet. Not ever, if she could help it. The rain started at 11:22 p.m., cold drops that turned the marble of the estate garden into a dark mirror. Rowan Hartley sat on the stone bench, her borrowed dress soaked through, her whole body trembling like a candle in the wind. The gold locket pressed against her chest, her mother's locket, the only thing she had pulled from the fire 3 months ago besides Oliver and $34. She touched it now, feeling the grooves worn smooth by decades of hands, and she could not stop shaking. An hour earlier, Cordelia Blackwood had stood in that grand ballroom surrounded by 50 people in clothes that cost more than everything Rowan had ever owned, and she had laughed. Not a kind laugh. A blade wrapped in ice. "Tell me, does Child Services know you were living in your car 3 weeks ago? Does the court know about your $34 net worth?" The room had gone silent. Every eye on Rowan. Every thought crystallizing into the same ugly truth: she did not belong here. She was nobody. A homeless woman who slept in a Honda Civic parked behind a Chevron. What was she doing in a guest room of this man's estate, wearing his sister's borrowed dress, pretending she had a future? The rain fell harder, drumming against the garden paths like a countdown. Rowan's breath came in gasps that she could not control. Her hands would not stop shaking. She was back in the parking lot 3 months ago, standing in the ashes of the shelter, holding only a photograph of her mother and a child who had nowhere to go. She was back in the car, rationing packets of ketchup from the diner because they were free, watching Oliver sleep on a coat she used as a pillow. How long before Giovanni Russo realized what she was? How long before the kindness stopped and the cruelty began? That was how it always went. Men like Anthony had taught her that. Men who promised protection and delivered punishment. Men who said they loved you and then used your dependence like a leash. But through an open window somewhere in the estate, she heard Oliver laugh. A real laugh, the kind she had not heard since his mother died in the hospital, the kind that belonged to a child who was finally safe. He was reading with Giovanni in the library, she knew. Giovanni had been teaching him to read for 8 days straight, patient with every hesitation, praising every word. That was not how men like Anthony loved. That was not how men who wanted control acted. She could leave. She should leave. Take the Civic. Disappear into the darkness the way she had always disappeared. It was what she was good at. It was what she knew. But then Oliver's laugh came again, brighter this time, and Rowan understood something that broke her open like glass. She could not save herself. Her life was too small, too broken, too far gone. But maybe she could save him. Maybe for once, that was enough. She stood, rain soaking through the borrowed dress, and walked back toward the house. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her heart was a fist beating against her ribs. She was terrified of what she would see when she reached him, afraid that the moment she asked for help, the answer would be no. Giovanni Russo was waiting in the doorway. He stood in the frame of the open glass doors, silhouetted against the warm light of the estate, and the first thing he did was take off his coat. Not his suit jacket, his coat, the cashmere one that cost more than a year of her old rent, the one that hung from his shoulders like he was a general surveying a battlefield. He wrapped it around her shoulders without asking permission. "You stayed," he said quietly. Rowan's eyes were burning. She could not speak. "I almost didn't," she whispered. "I was going to leave. I was sitting out there thinking about taking Oliver and driving until we were far enough away that nobody could find us. That nobody could hurt him." Giovanni's hand moved to her face, his thumb brushing away rain that might have been tears. "But you didn't." "No." Her voice broke. "I didn't." "Why?" Because he laughed. Because in 8 days of living in this house, he's become a child instead of a ghost. Because I don't know how to do anything right, but I know how to love him. And maybe that's the only thing that matters. Giovanni said nothing. He just pulled her inside, closed the glass doors against the storm, and held her while her whole body shook. His men, Vinny and Enzo, who had dragged Anthony Marchetti away in handcuffs that afternoon, exchanged a look across the foyer. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Russo, they had never seen him hold anyone like this. Like she was something precious. Like she was not nobody. It took another 3 days for the federal charges against Anthony to be finalized. 3 days of lawyers and paperwork and testimony. 3 days of watching the man who had terrorized her for months collapsing into sobs as he was led away in an orange jumpsuit, screaming that he was innocent, that this was a setup, that she had ruined his life. Giovanni watched it all happen and felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest, not anger, but satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who had spent 15 years enforcing a code that protected his own, and who was now using that same code to protect someone outside his circle. Someone who mattered more than all the rules he had ever lived by. The charity gala had been a mistake. Bringing Rowan into that world, exposing her to people like Cordelia Blackwood, was like bringing a ghost into a ballroom full of vultures. But my son had insisted. "My brother smiles now," she had said to Rowan the night before, her fingers reading the air as she sat at the dinner table. "I cannot see it, but I can hear it in his voice. That is because of you. You must come to the gala. You must stand beside him and let Miami see what I already know." Cordelia's humiliation had been swift. The IRS investigators found discrepancies in her charitable foundation within 4 hours. By morning, the newspapers were running her mugshot. Her husband, who had tolerated her cruelty for 22 years, had filed for divorce. Her society friends, the people who had laughed in that ballroom, vanished like smoke. But the real justice came at a cost that nobody could calculate in dollars. Rowan stood in the library of the estate, watching Oliver trace his finger across the words of a picture book. "Cat," he said slowly, and Giovanni smiled from the chair beside him. "That's right. And what does a cat do?" "Meow." Oliver's voice was growing stronger every day. The nightmares were coming less often. The way he flinched when someone moved too quickly was fading. This was what Giovanni had fought for. Not Cordelia's humiliation. Not Anthony's imprisonment. Not the $30,000 security system that now surrounded the property. He had fought for this moment, a child learning to read, a woman who had been invisible becoming seen, a life built on something other than fear. On the 15th day, the custody paperwork was finalized. Rowan Hartley was officially Oliver's legal guardian. The judge had looked at her across the courtroom and said something she would never forget. you have shown remarkable courage in the face of impossible circumstances. This child is fortunate to have you." She had cried for an hour afterward. That evening, Giovanni found her on the balcony, touching the locket as the sun turned the Miami skyline gold. The storm had passed. The city was clean. Everything felt possible. "Thank you," she said, and the words were too small for everything she meant. Giovanni stepped beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. The night was warm. The city lights began to glow as darkness crept across the sky. "You saved my sister. You pulled her from a rainstorm when she was lost and terrified. You brought her back to me." His voice was like thunder, deep and solid like an oath. "I did nothing but give back what you had already given. You gave me my life back." "No." He turned to face her fully. "You did that yourself. I just removed the obstacles. I just made sure nobody could hurt you again." Rowan looked at this man, this dangerous man, this man who had just destroyed two people's lives to protect her, and she understood that love was not always gentle. Sometimes it was fierce. Sometimes it came wrapped in midnight operations and federal investigations. Sometimes it meant standing in the darkness and making sure nobody could ever hurt the people you cared about. "What happens now?" she asked. Giovanni reached into his jacket. He pulled out a small box, velvet dark, and Rowan's breath stopped. "Now," he said quietly, "if you want to, we build something that lasts." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious, but beautiful. A single diamond set in white gold. Simple. True. The kind of ring a woman who had once owned nothing could believe in. "Oliver asked me something this morning," Giovanni continued. "He asked if you would be his mother forever, and if I would be his father. I told him yes to both. I told him that was my intention. But I wanted to ask you first, because some promises need to be made by more than one person." Rowan could not speak. Her hands were shaking. This was not how her life was supposed to go. She was supposed to disappear. She was supposed to be nobody. But Oliver's laugh came from somewhere in the house, that bright laugh that meant he was happy, and she understood that sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." 2 weeks had passed since the federal agents led Anthony Marchetti away in handcuffs, his face gray as ash. Since Cordelia Blackwood's photograph appeared in every newspaper in Miami with the headline, "Philanthropist faces racketeering charges." Since the world finally saw what Rowan had always known, that cruelty wears expensive clothes and a graceful smile. The courtroom victory had been swift. Giovanni's lawyers were merciless, their evidence surgical and precise. Within 6 days, the custody papers were signed. Oliver was hers now. Legally, permanently, irrevocably hers. Rowan stood in her new apartment on a Tuesday morning, still unable to believe the 4 walls were hers. The rent was paid through the year, Giovanni had handled it before she could protest. First and last month, security deposit, utilities covered. She had tried to argue. He had simply kissed her forehead and said, "This is not negotiable." His voice was like stone. She had learned not to argue when his voice sounded like stone. The backpack still hung in her closet. She had not thrown it away. Could not throw it away. That frayed nylon was proof that she had survived, that her hands had held everything she owned and kept moving anyway. She touched it every morning, let her fingers trace the torn seams, then she would put on the clothes hanging beside it, real clothes now, clothes without holes, clothes that fit properly, and go to work. Because she still worked at Mel's diner 2 nights a week. Vinny had warned her against it. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," he had said, leaning against her kitchen counter with that patient expression a lieutenants wore when they were trying to convince her of obvious truths. "You're the boss's woman. You have standing now." But standing was not the same as belonging. And Mel had given her shifts when no other restaurant in Miami would hire someone with no fixed address and a permanent smell of gasoline on her clothes. So twice a week, At 11 at night, Rowan tied her apron around her waist and walked into that checkered floor diner where the neon signs hummed like dying insects and the coffee tasted like time standing still. That was where Giovanni found her at 3 in the morning. He sat in the last booth, their booth now, though they never called it that. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Rowan had earned in her entire first year at Mel's. His gold watch caught the light as he lifted the coffee cup she had just filled. Dark eyes followed her as she moved between tables, moving through the restaurant with a grace that had nothing to do with the joints in her knees and everything to do with knowing she was safe now. When her shift ended at 6 in the morning, the sun was just beginning to crack the sky open. Giovanni stood and walked her to the door. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture so natural now that she no longer remembered learning it was possible to be touched like this, gently, protectively, like she was something precious and not something disposable. "Oliver asked me about you again," he said as they walked to the black SUV parked at the curb. "He asked if you would be his mother forever." Rowan's throat tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him yes. That was my intention to tell him. But I wanted to ask you first, because some promises need to be made by more than one person." Giovanni opened the passenger door. "He is still asleep. Vinny's wife stayed with him. But when we get home, he will wake up. And he will run to you like he always does." Home. That word still caught her sometimes, still felt like something she had no right to claim. The drive to the estate took 18 minutes. Giovanni had timed it once, memorized the route, knew which streets would be empty at that hour. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over to rest on Rowan's knee. She had stopped asking what the hand meant. It meant "I am here." It meant "you are not alone." It meant all the words he struggled to say. When they pulled through the gates, Oliver was already awake, standing in the garden in his small pajamas with his stuffed rabbit under one arm. The moment he saw her, he began to run. Rowan caught him and lifted him, his small body warm from sleep, smelling of soap and boy and safety. He wrapped his arms around her neck and whispered, "You came back." "I always come back," she said. "Always." Giovanni stood beside them, watching. In his eyes was something that Vinny later described to Enzo as the look of a man who had found what he thought was impossible to find, a reason to be human again. That afternoon, sitting on the marble steps of the estate while Oliver played in the courtyard, Giovanni told her stories he had never told anyone. About his brother's betrayal, the choice between mercy and survival, choosing survival and carrying the guilt like a second skeleton beneath his skin. About the man he had been before violence became his language, before the Empire required him to make decisions that carved him down to bone and malice. Rowan listened and did not try to absolve him. Did not say things like "it wasn't your fault" or "you were just protecting what was yours." She understood that some sins were not forgiven, they were simply integrated. They became part of your architecture. You learn to live around them the way a tree grows around an embedded stone. "I don't know how to be this person," she told him as the sun moved lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. "The one who has things. The one who matters." Giovanni reached over and took her hand. His grip was firm, solid, like an oath. "You always mattered. The world just failed to notice. The world is full of failures. Do not be one of them by believing what the world told you about yourself." On the 18th day after Cordelia's arrest, my son visited. She moved through the house with the careful navigation of the blind, one hand trailing along the wall, her guide dog beside her. Rowan watched her with a tenderness that surprised her. This woman, this fierce, brilliant woman, had become her friend somewhere in the chaos. My son sat in the garden and told Rowan stories about Giovanni as a boy. Before the violence. Before the choices. He was gentle, she said, her sightless eyes turned toward the sound of children laughing. That was always his nature. The violence was something that was done to him, and he learned to do it back. But beneath, he is still gentle. You have reminded him of that. Oliver brought his drawing to show her, a picture in crayon of Rowan and Giovanni and himself, 3 stick figures holding hands. My son traced the lines with her fingers and said, "This is a family." Later that evening, Giovanni gave Rowan a gift. A photograph in a silver frame. It was from the gala, the night before everything changed. All four of them together, smiling at the camera. Rowan and Giovanni and Oliver and my son, pressed together like people who belong to each other. Rowan took the frame with trembling hands. She placed it on her nightstand beside her mother's locket. Old and new. Loss and hope, side by side. 6 months later, Mel's Diner, 3:22 in the morning. The same checkered floor. The same dying neon. The same smell of burnt coffee and time standing still. Rowan and Giovanni sat in the last booth, exhausted and content. Oliver slept in the next booth, covered with Giovanni's jacket. They had been at a movie, stopped here out of nostalgia, because nostalgia had become something Rowan could afford now. A young waitress refilled their cups. She was invisible the way Rowan had once been invisible. The girl did not make eye contact, did not expect kindness, did not believe her tips would be fair. Rowan watched her move between tables and remembered. Giovanni reached across the table and took Rowan's hand. His gold watch caught the fluorescent light. "What are you thinking?" "That's 6 months ago. I was her. I was the one nobody saw." "I saw you," he said quietly. "Even before I knew about Oliver, I saw you." Rowan smiled. "You saw someone drowning. Same as you. Maybe that is why we found each other. 2 people drowning in the same storm." He paused. His dark eyes burned with something that had nothing to do with the neon and everything to do with decision. "Marry me." Rowan's breath stopped. "What?" "I am not good at romance. I am not good at pretty words. But I know you saved my sister, protected my son, and pulled me back from a darkness I did not know I could escape. I know that when I look at you, I see home. So marry me." She was crying, laughing. "That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Is that a yes?" "Yes. Yes to everything." They kissed across the table, and Oliver stirred awake just in time to see it, grinned sleepily with the satisfaction of a child who had orchestrated something perfectly, though he had only been sleeping. The young waitress refilled their coffee again, still not looking up. Rowan left $100 bill as a tip, the kind of kindness that had saved her once, passed forward into the hands of someone drowning. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Rowan had learned that truth in Fire and Poverty and 3 in the Morning. She had learned it in the arms of a man who had been built by violence but chose gentleness. She had learned it from a child who asked simply, "Will you stay?" And she had answered, "Always." This story teaches us that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way. If you believe that, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell us how this story made you feel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.